Joining me now is New South Wales One Nation leader Tanya Mihalich and broadcaster Chris Ilsley. Hi to you both. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Tanya, so we've got Giles out today. He's trying again with Direction 110. As I said, same minister, same old Giles, different directive. Another shocking week. What is going on?
Yeah, well, it's same old Giles and same old Labor. You know, same old tactics as always with Labor. Try and blame everybody else for their own mistakes. I mean, let's have a look at the type of mistakes that we've seen under Giles. You know, he blames the High Court. He then blames, the AAT. He then blames, the AFP. Then he blames the department for this drones debacle. I mean, he's blaming everybody. Bar himself. He won't accept responsibility. The latest tactic, of course, from Albanese and from Labor is to suggest that, look, Giles just has a difficult job. That's what Albanese said yesterday. Jim Chalmers only a few hours ago also said the same thing, that, he's got a difficult job. Well, you know what's a difficult job? Being a policeman is a difficult job. Being a nurse, being a paramedic, being a surgeon, there's plenty of difficult jobs.
Absolutely.
If this is all too difficult for Giles and for Labor, well, stop, just put the white flag up and say, I give up, I've had enough, I can't do it.
Yeah.
This is compromising the safety of Australians. I think people have had enough, and Labor cannot be trusted when it comes to immigration at all.
No.
The message can't be any clearer, but they will protect this minister. There's a protection racket going on right now.
Clearly.
They'll protect him all the way.
Yeah.
As you rightly said, he's a refugee lawyer. This is his dream job.
Yeah.
We've said in the past he's a factional ally of Albanese, and Albanese will not drop him.
No.
He'll go down in the ship, I think, rather than dropping him.
He is an activist in disguise as Australia's immigration minister. And Chris, as we've just said, Giles has made so many mistakes. The latest is drummed up this drone fantasy, yet somehow he's survived another week.
Yeah, well, it was obviously the fault of somebody within his department. I don't know who this faceless individual is, and somewhere along the line somebody would have to say, well, the person who made the decision would have to be responsible. But given how important this is, and given everything surrounding it, Danica, I would have thought that when he was given information, he would have gone away and tried to verify that information and not just simply accepted it. And I still hold to my belief that what we're seeing here is the minister doing exactly what he, the Prime Minister and the government generally want done. This is not somebody who's wandering out of control. This is somebody who's doing what he wants to do, what he believes he should be doing, and at the same time he's hoping somehow that the public aren't going to notice.
No, well, that's right. That's why everyone keeps saying he's got a very tough job. It's this whole protection racket, as you said. Now, Peter Dutton has called on Anthony Albanese to reject the anti-Semitism flourishing within the Greens political party and put its candidates last on Labor how-to-vote cards at the next election. Tanya, look, the Greens have really lost it. It used to be all about the environment. Now it's pro-Palestine and constant division.
The Greens have never just been about the environment. They're not called the Watermelon Party for nothing.
No, that's true.
Green on the outside and red on the inside. And they're a very divisive party too. They love dividing and conquering. And they've got 15% polling at the moment nationally. And I can tell you, despite what Dutton has suggested Labor should do, Labor's joined at the hip with the Greens, okay? They will not ever not preference, they need that preferential deal, okay? Labor's travelling at, 28.5% nationally, the Greens are 15%, so Labor desperately needs the Greens, and they will continue to preference each other. It's the only way Labor can survive, and that's the real travesty here, is that we know the Greens should never be anywhere near government, ever.
No way.
But they have a big hold over the Labor Party, and the Labor Party desperately needs to keep that relationship and those arrangements in place with the Greens. So Dutton and everybody else can say, look, you shouldn't be preferencing the Greens, you shouldn't have a preference deal, but you can bet your bottom dollar that Labor will be behind doors negotiating these preference deals all the way to the next election and the one after that.
And look, this is the problem, because in the event, Chris, of a minority government, it would be Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister, then you'd have the de facto leader, Adam Bandt. I mean, that would be a disaster.
Oh, there's no doubt that would be a disaster, and that's also exactly what would happen, because there is, without doubt, the Labor Party will do a deal with the Greens. But here's the other question. I think the bigger question that we need to ask ourselves here, and the glaringly obvious question, at some point we have to have a look at the preferential system, because there is no doubt that it is used to manipulate outcomes. And if you go and talk to the average person and say, OK, Danica, who did you vote for? You might say candidate B. But candidate B directed their preferences to candidate D, and candidate D ends up winning. And I say, well, you voted for candidate D effectively, Danica, and you say, no, I didn't. I voted for candidate B. This is what happens with preference deals, and this is why, for example, they're so important. And this is why you hear them talking about preference swaps and all that sort of stuff. At some point, I think this gets us to having a look at preferences, how they operate, and whether we need to look at some form of modification, because there is no doubt they're distorting the outcome. And in this situation, go back to Tanya's point about the Greens being 15% of the vote, they could end up very much being 50% of the government, even though they don't make up those numbers.
That's frightening.
It's actually a terrifying prospect you've just put to us there, Chris. Now, look, this is interesting because controversial plans to change New South Wales laws to allow people to change their sex simply by nominating their preferred gender on a form, would you believe it, have been, well, overwhelmingly rejected by the public. Independent Sydney MP Alex Greenwich's proposals also attempt to liberalise prostitution, allowing it to be practised near schools and churches, allow for overseas commercial surrogacy, and make it easier for children to access puberty blockers without their parents' consent. Tanya, almost 83% of New South Wales residents are opposed to these plans. Are you surprised?
No, I'm not surprised, because I think most people out there are morally good and have and understand that this bill and what's being proposed here is so extreme and so insidious. This is about 20 pieces of legislation are being impacted by what's being proposed here by Greenwich. Look, Greenwich just lives in a bubble, and anyone supporting this legislation really doesn't understand that the people of New South Wales will not tolerate these type of changes. The idea that you can allow somebody to, at whim, change their gender ID by filling out a form and paying a small fee is preposterous. There are profound further impacts. It impacts women's rights, it impacts children's rights, there are issues around protection, and it opens up a whole floodgate of other issues.
Yes.
Even if you don't want to look at this from a moral standpoint, let's look at this from an economic or bureaucratic point. The idea that you can change your form here, how's that going to impact your licence? What about your patient records at a hospital?
Absolutely, exactly.
What about everything else that it impacts? You know, this is a ridiculous proposal by Greenwich. And what's really troubling is that the Labor Party is actually entertaining it. It sent this bill into a parliamentary committee.
Wow.
They're actually considering it. That's what's really concerning for me. And I want to say a message to the Premier. The Premier, you're a family man, you've got 3 kids. You certainly don't want to see your own children accessing puberty blockers or hormonal sex change medication without your consent or your knowledge. Why would you propose that for any other family? This really needs to be knocked back ASAP.
Absolutely.
It is an extreme bit of legislation. This is like a horror flick gone wrong.
Well, where does it end? I mean, this is the problem, Chris, because it opens up a complete can of worms, doesn't it?
Oh, it certainly does. And here's another point I'd like to ask. These very same people who are pushing ideas like, for example, children being able to access puberty blockers at a very young age without their parents' consent, they seem to me, from what I can see, to be the same people who are arguing that people should not be held legally responsible for criminal acts until they're 14. So you can't be held responsible for committing a crime until you're 14, but you're old enough pre-puberty to make a decision to take puberty blockers, which I might add, I suspect we don't know the potential long-term effects of those kind of drugs. And how is it that somebody could just simply say, well, I want to change my gender? I think when I return to Melbourne, I'm going to rock around to ANZ HQ at Docklands and tell them that I now identify as a billionaire, and would they please adjust my bank accounts accordingly? This is just how silly it gets. And the problem is,
Chris, it's being considered.
again, as Tanya identified, What was that, Tanya?
Oh, the problem is it is silly, but it's being entertained by this government. You know, they're giving it they've gone to a committee stage, they're actually considering it. That's the disturbing part.
Yeah, it's frightening.
And it makes you wonder, why are they considering it? And it then gets to the next question, who's driving the agenda and what is the purpose behind the agenda? Because I can't see anything positive for this.
No.
And when we talk about, for example, let's not sexualise children, well, being able to just at a whim change your gender or go and get yourself puberty blockers at a very young age without your parents being aware, that, to me anyway, is child abuse.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Look, we're almost out of time, but I want to get to this because Joe Biden is another shocker today. His perpetual state of confusion was on full display in Normandy during the D-Day 80th anniversary ceremony. Here he was. Okay, so he's come out of the car, Tanya. He doesn't know where he is. He's done some sort of bizarre half squat. I don't know if he thought there was a chair there. I don't know what he was doing, but he's really lost it.
Well, and the sad reality is the Democrats have got nowhere else to go but with him. So they keep, you know, they're backing him all the way to the end, really.
Yeah.
Look, he just, at the moment, is providing a lot of great videos and memes and social media.
What else are we going to talk about?
But he's not providing any policy. There's no sort of directional reason to vote for the Democrats come November. It's a very sad situation. I mean, some people are saying it's elder abuse, still letting him, you know, be put out there as a candidate as president. It's extraordinary. Look, they've got their convention coming up in August, so maybe they might find somebody else.
Look, maybe they will. Look, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Chris Ilsley, Tanya Mihalich, great to have you both on. Thank you so much for joining me on the show this evening.